Hi, everybody. Thanks for waiting. Appreciate your patience. If you've been paying attention to a lot of the presentations over the past couple days, you've already seen a lot of references to Stack Overflow. So please welcome Jeff Attwood, the founder of Stack Overflow.
So thanks for having me. I want to make sure the mic is on. That's good. There are stickers, by the way. Somebody should be handing out stickers, so you will get something. A little gamification for you guys for coming to this session. So I'm here to talk about Stack Overflow. I didn't know if everybody in the session would actually know what Stack Overflow was, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the site itself, why it exists, what it is. So Stack Overflow is a Q&A site for software developers. So everything that you see on this site was created by a programmer, not us, the company. And it is a system of peers helping other peers. It's basically a learning system. That's kind of what we concluded. It's a system for programmers to show off what they know, because programmers love to show off what they know, and also a place you can go to learn about stuff you didn't know, and also to answer questions that you actually have about how do I do this thing with software that I'm trying to figure out. So the home page is very simply just a list of questions. There's a bunch of metrics that we put on the front page, of course. There's a reputation number next to each user, votes on questions. Some questions don't do so well, as you can see that question at the bottom with a -3, which is great. Yeah, voting is a tricky thing. A lot of people don't like to vote, and that causes a lot of havoc in systems like ours. So the weird thing about the gamification, the word gamification, is when we started Stack Overflow in 2008, this thing didn't exist as a concept. This wasn't our goal to build a system that does this. It was kind of accidental. When we set up Stack Overflow, Joel Spolsky, my business partner, and I had certain ideas about the way programmers' minds work and the behaviors that we wanted. And when I say behaviors that we wanted, I wanted behaviors that were good for the person and good for the community, what I call sustainable behaviors. And to me, adding the game elements to Stack Overflow was a way of getting people to do the things that are healthy for themselves and others and not do the things that are unhealthy for themselves and others. And that's, when I say gamification, that's what I think of. And the weird thing about this is I get these, well, of course, I guess the guy from Engine Yard was just on stage, so maybe that's not as weird, but I get this banner all the time from Google when I'm browsing the web, gamification! It's just funny that, if you look up on Wikipedia, which is what this is, we're listed. I didn't put that there. It just happened. It's weird to be associated with this concept that I never thought of as a concept. So odd. Now, another thing that I think is cool when you think about gamification, I think there's a lot of ways to abuse. The word is kind of weird, first of all. And second, it's a way to sort of trick people into doing what you want them to do. And I think that's a very wrong-headed way to look at this. I think the way you want to look at this is an actual study that I just saw yesterday on Twitter that got published. It's a study with children between the ages of 3 and 5, 129 children, and they had 2 sessions. One session was something that was like play and something that was not like play. And then they were observing how they did in these activities. And this is science, people, right? This is actual science. This is an experiment. They're measuring it. These are scientists. And what they found was that the kids who were in the play activity felt better about what they were doing, even though it was basically the same thing. So I want to be clear that when I think of gamification, what I think is we're trying to make things fun that should be fun anyway, because you learn more when you're having fun. That is the point. It's not, let me trick somebody into doing X, let me create brand loyalty. It's create an environment where people want to be there because it's entertaining, fundamentally entertaining, and in a learning way, right? This was an activity for children who are always learning. That's what kids at this age do. They're just I have a child who's 3 years old, and that's all they do. They're just constantly sucking in information and learning. You can't not learn as a child. It's what you do. It's what you're born to do. It's what we're all technically born to do, is learn stuff. So if you make that learning activity feel fun and become like a form of play, people will want to do it more. And the results will be better both for them and for the world and you if you have a company. So there's this weird interaction with software developers where a lot of people who are software developers started out as gamers. And if you look back, on particularly the Commodore 64 and some of the older computers, a lot of programmers got started by just building these stupid little games or modifying little games that they had that were written in BASIC. And there's this weird interaction between programmers and gamers, or almost it's a very, very close relationship. Like one of the biggest Stack Exchange sites that I'll show you, one of the bigger ones, is the gaming site. You know, a site where programmers talk about video games. So we're sort of naturally good at this idea that we don't just play the game, we want to create the game, we want to control the game, we want to modify the game. So we're kind of the canary in the coal mine for a lot of this stuff. I think what you see programmers doing with this stuff is the tip of the iceberg, what you're going to see everyone do with this stuff eventually. And so let me talk a little bit about Stack Exchange. So Stack Overflow is how this started. It's a Q&A site for software developers. And we realized, like, wow, this is really working. Like, people love the site. It's producing amazing information. People are learning tons of stuff. Everybody has nothing but positive things to say about the experience on the site. They're not saying, hey, you're tricking me. They're saying, hey, this feels really good. I'm having fun, and I'm learning stuff. And that is explicitly the goal. So we said, well, hey, if it works for programming, maybe it'll work for other topics too. So that's what Stack Exchange is. Stack Exchange is taking our engine and doing the exact same thing on different topics. And some of these communities have their own sort of norms. They have very interesting feelings to them, and like the way they approach the Q&A space and the way they do things is really kind of fun to look at. And there's some really nice sites. I do encourage you to explore that because I like to think that what we produce on Stack Exchange is very, very high quality information. The trade-off is that we're kind of dicks sometimes about what we'll accept. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason not everybody goes to Harvard. There's a reason not everybody goes to community college, right? Like we have standards. Some people on the internet may be unfamiliar with this concept of having standards, but we have them, and we enforce them. And we're totally cool with it. If you can like play by our rules, then you can play the Stack Exchange game, and it produces some amazing information. So do check it out. Now, how do we launch new Q&A sites? Now, this feeds back into the reputation system that you saw, those little numbers next to everybody's name. Once you get reputation in our system, you can actually tell us to create a new Q&A site on a different topic. And if you have a lot of reputation, your vote in the system carries a lot more weight. So the reason we launch new Q&A sites is because the community told us to do it. Now, sometimes that works out, and sometimes it doesn't, to be honest. It's all experimental. Like we had an atheism site that was just depressingly bad and got shut down for good reason, I think. Because after you've decided there is no God, it's like, what do you talk about? It's like, okay, there's no God. Okay, we're done. Yeah, it wasn't a good idea. The community doesn't always know what it's doing, for the record, but that's okay. That's, it's democracy. We figure it out, right? It just takes some time to figure all this stuff out. So if you go to Area 51, you can see some of the stuff that's being proposed. Some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. I think the Raspberry Pi site, yeah, that's actually in beta. That went really fast because it's a strong overlap with our really geeky audience. So the reputation system works on a couple different levels, not just at the site level, but at the meta, like the network level. You can propose a new site, and you carry weight based on how much reputation you have in our system. Here's a summary of like a lot of the different sites that we have, how they work, the different topics you can sense. And again, super, super geeky, but that's cool because I'm a geek. I like geeks. I like geeky things. Not all geeky. We're pushing the boundary. This is what I call the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game, where you have a programmer that's a system administrator who knows another system administrator who's a pilot. And then you have a site about being a pilot, right? That's not too geeky. And then eventually you get out to cooking and the home improvement site, which is here, which is pretty salt-of-the-earth kind of stuff. So a couple key things I want to cover here, because I think when I see sites doing gamification, there's a few things I think that they get wrong very consistently. And I want to cover that because these are like big picture items that I think everybody should get right. And one of those is that the concept of reputation in a system always has to come from your peers. And a lot of times I see sites where reputation comes from the system or just like doing something over and over, and I'm like, you blew it. Like, you don't understand how this works. On Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange, so here's a list of, this is the reputation league for the mathematics site, math.stackexchange. And you can sort of see like how much reputation people have. And you might say, well what does that mean? Arturo Magadin has 134,000 reputation. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that in the aggregate, a lot of people on the math site think Arturo knows what he's talking about because they upvoted his content. Okay? He didn't just post 50,000 times because that doesn't mean anything. A lot of different users voted up his content. So here's the actual user page on the site itself. This is more granular. This is the AllTime Reputation Leagues, which is at the Stack Exchange Network Hub. Like if you want to play, this is playing the game at a different level. If you're on the site itself, this is what you would normally see. And notice that it's filtered in the top right by month. That's the default. This is basically who has generated the most reputation in the last month. because this does become a winners-take-all game. You do see certain users, like on Stack Overflow, there's this guy, John Skeet, who's amazing. He's basically a cyborg, produces like unbelievable amounts of amazing content, and nobody can really keep up with him, right? So that's boring, because John is so good, right? But there's a lot of people that are good. So what this does is on the site itself, it lets you play at the week level, at the month level. You could be John Skeet for a week until he crushes you the next week, but So this is showing you like who's doing well. There's Arturo, the guy that I showed you before, but Brian Scott, Andre, Marvis are all doing really, really well. And you also get a sense of like what they're good at. These are tags. What you're seeing under their names are like the tags, the content, the type of mathematics questions that they're answering, and they're getting most of their reputation from. So you're getting a couple of things here. You're getting a sense of like who's active on the site, who knows what they're talking about, and what topics do they have expertise in? What topics is this reputation actually coming from? That's what you're seeing here. So, and this is all completely optional. We don't put this in front of your face, right? Other than there is a number next to everybody's name, but nobody's forcing you to go to the users page and view it this way. But this is the default sorting. The default sorting is who generated the most reputation in the most like competitive time element for the current range. Sometimes that's week, sometimes that's month. But the sort order here is very much by default. It is sorted by reputation, right? You're seeing, and we don't say this is a leaderboard. We don't say you should be trying to kick ass and get to the top of this list. We just show the numbers. And then people say, hey, numbers, right? And particularly geeky people, numbers, I'm going to optimize for whatever number you show me. Now, in this case, we do actually want that, but we don't say it, and that is very, very important. Because the minute you say it, it's kind of like asking for sex. It doesn't really work anymore, okay? So you just show it, and you let them do what they want to do. And reputation, it's so critical. This is so critical. Reputation cannot come from the system. Reputation cannot come from doing the same thing over and over. Oh, you posted 500 times. Congratulations. Who cares? I could post 500 times. That doesn't mean they're any good. Because the time you invest doesn't equal skill. That's just the World of Warcraft dichotomy, right? Because if you play World of Warcraft and you play all day long for months and months and years, does that mean you're very, very skilled? Maybe. But mostly it just means you play a lot. And that doesn't actually mean a whole lot. So when you're building reputation systems, this is very, very important to keep in mind. Reputation has to come from the other players in the system, and it should never come from simple repetition of doing things over and over. That is, again, when I see that, I think you blew it. And the other thing to bear in mind here is when I say somebody voted for someone else, you can't vote as a new user. To even be able to vote, other people have to vote for you, okay? So coming into the system, the only thing you can do is post content and make it be good. And then other people will say, hey, that was really cool. That was a great post. Here's your upvote. And then, and only then, you get the right to vote for other people and help them claw their way up the ladder of voting. So the votes in the system, by definition, come from reasonably experienced users from the get-go. There's a ton of gaming you can do if you allow new users to vote anyway, but it's a very good system. So here's a user profile page. And yet again, you're going to see some ambient sorting here. So this is the guy who was the leader on the monthly user list that I showed you earlier. And you're seeing some default sort orders. We do not say this is a leaderboard. We simply show you the information in a certain order. We show you certain stats. And we say, hey, make of these stats what you will. And up to and including nothing, right? Like, this doesn't have to mean anything. If you go on math, and you post, you enjoy reading and writing about math, then you could be perfectly happy and not even care if your content is being upvoted or downvoted or any of that stuff. You don't have to care about any of this stuff. But when you go to your user page, we will show you sort of your greatest hits. At least what other people in our system thought what you were posting actually sort of worked. That's what they're showing here. And again, people sort of start to optimize for this. And it's really tricky because you got to be careful. You got to show the right stuff. Because if you show the wrong stuff and people start optimizing for the wrong things, you're kind of in trouble. So all this is very much intentional, but you never actually say, go optimize for this, and I don't think you should. So the other thing that I think is really important is you have to actually give power back to the community. Like if you have a reputation system, what can I do when I get 5,000 reputation? What can I get when I get 10,000 reputation? Can I do anything that matters? Do you really actually trust me? Or are you just like incrementing a number next to my name because it feels good, right? This is the power argument. Like, if you really believe in the system, you've got to give power back to the community. And one of the big ways we see this is on the meta site. Every site we launch has a meta site where people go in and discuss, like, why does the site work the way it works? This is where all leadership forms in a community. If you don't have a place for your community to go to discuss the community, you're blowing it. Because your community wants to do that. And they're going to help each other. But if you don't let them do that, you're not going to get leaders. You're not going to get people willing to help each other. We do a ton of work around moderators. We do elect formal moderators, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. It is a huge source of thought in the Stack Exchange Network. It's like, how do we appoint moderators? Who are the moderators? What are the qualities moderators have? And if you look here on the network, we have, for any given Stack Exchange site, there's at least 3 community moderators that were appointed and sometimes elected. We like to have elections, but the community has to be large enough. So this concept of having an election is giving power back to the community. We're saying, look, if you like this community and you hang out here enough, you could be appointed and have as much power, almost as much power as the developers do on the site. You can just go in and willy-nilly delete stuff if you want to. That's something that's available to you if you get elected or appointed. But even outside of like formally elected moderators, individual members of the community get to do stuff based on this stuff. Hey, somebody upvoted me, right? There's the voting privilege I talked about. It's very early on. Flagging is another thing you get really early on. Leaving comments, which is like basically discussion, which we try to suppress in the Stack Exchange engine. That takes reputation. The ability to edit anybody's post, right? Now you can suggest edits as an anonymous user on any Stack Exchange site, but to go in and just change somebody's site, somebody's post and have it go through immediately, that takes 2,000 reputation. So, right, if it's 10 points for an answer upvote, you're looking at 200 upvotes, right? And there's a lot of other privileges here I won't get into, but all the way on up to including the voting to delete stuff, which we view as a very, very powerful thing in our system. It's a soft delete. So the game, if you want to call it that, is really people teaching each other and learning from each other. That's the game, okay? We're not really trying to trick you into doing anything other than learning from your peers. And we view this as a healthy, necessary, good thing. Now, if you look at an actual question, so this is a question on the math site, the numbers are very, very prominent, right? And this does affect sort order. And when you look at the answers to this question for this math proof that somebody's posting about, you see, of course, the answer with 38 votes is near the top, right? So it affects sort order. It also has this little green check mark, which is from the question author. It's a little kudos that you can give to someone. Say, hey, this answer helped me the most. And that may or may not equate to the number of votes that the community liked. We see this sometimes where the question owner will decide they like some answer that nobody else likes, or that people don't like very much. And that's a really interesting dynamic, because then you see the check mark way down here. And you think, interesting, the question owner didn't like the same thing as the community. But that's okay, right? And it's a very different kind of social signaling message that you're giving here, saying, this answer of all the answers that's all helped me the most, and therefore I like this answer the best. Okay? But the community has its own will. And this is, again, giving the community power to decide what they like and even overrule the question owner as necessary. But this is the game, right? When I say the game, this is the game. This is the core of the game. You ask a question, you get answers, stuff gets voted up and down. It's very simple, right? But very, very powerful. And I think the thing to keep in mind here, the final lesson that I want to communicate is that all these game elements are not here because we're trying to create a game. It's because we're trying to serve a higher purpose. We're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to get people to actually help each other. That's why the game elements are there. Not to trick you into doing something that the company wants. It's because you should be helping your peers. And that's what the game elements do. So Kathy Sierra has been writing a lot on the web for a while and did a lot of Java training for a long time. She's kind of famous in certain web circles. But this is the kind of stuff you want to focus on. It's not how does this make my product better. It's like, how does this help the user kick ass? How do we let the community show off how awesome they are to each other? How do I leave, as I call it, breadcrumb trails of my awesomeness for other people to follow? That's the kind of system you want to build, where your system makes the community feel great about itself because they have power, because they have agency, because they can do things that matter and actually affect change. So I want to ask you guys that, like, when you think of gamification, like, what is your higher purpose? What problem are you trying to solve here? And how are you making it easier for your community to help itself? And that's what gamification is really about. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We have time for a couple questions. Anybody back there? First.
Make sure you have the microphone.
So I had a question about your new users being able to vote. You said that an existing user had to vote for the new user before they could vote. But when you initially started the site, what did you do about voting and when you had 0 users? How did the users first get the ability to vote?
There's an initial, like if in the Stack Exchange process, the Area 51 process, there's a private beta. And in the private beta, we only let in people that sort of committed to the site early on, like the true believers that started the site. And they do have the right to vote, like initially, because we trust them. So they're right, there is a bit of a seeding process, a kickstarting process that goes on initially. But after that, it becomes very self-sustaining because people are very willing to vote each other, particularly upvoting answers is very, very common. So, but you're right, there's a bootstrap.
I see the content of Stack Overflow is perfect because you have people asking questions and then people provide answers. And the answer itself is proof that they've done the work, and it's easy to give a vote for that. What do you think about other things which aren't quite so have that kind of relationship? Like, for example, a person might self-report that they've done 10 things. How do how can other people vote that up?
I see what you're saying. So the question is essentially, outside of Q&A where there's not a right answer, say it's just a discussion, how do you judge content in that scenario? Well, I think there's a couple different ways. One is bookmarking. Sometimes people, even if they aren't willing to like something, like the Facebook style like, that's a valid way. Like somebody posts something really cool, it's like, oh, cool, I like this. But even if you aren't willing to do that, like bookmarking it is sometimes a lot more palatable to people because they're not thinking, oh, I have to decide if I like this. That's too much for me to think about at the moment. I'll just bookmark it and come back to it later. But if somebody's willing to come back later to something you wrote, that's fairly significant, right? So I think bookmarking can work. Another thing that can work is like how many times was it read, if you can track that. If people are actually reading it, I mean actually reading it, not just scrolling past it or whatever. This is a technical problem, but it's solvable. How many times people read it? How many times people interacted with it? Like, did people reply to it? Like, say you ask me, like, who's your favorite X-Man? And I go, Wolverine sucks. And then like 20 people reply to that. Well, that was significant, right? 20 people replied to that, so something was going on. In this case, I was just being a troll, but you can see where useful stuff gets replied to because it's interesting. So I think you got to look at metrics around like, how are people reading this, processing it, and interacting with it, and how do we measure that? And it can be subtle, but I think there's ways to do it even for discussions. But you're right that we cheat in the sense that there is a correct answer. When you ask a programming question, when you ask a mathematics question, right, that's God's language. I mean, there's always a correct answer to a math problem, right? Verifiably correct. And even in programming, there's like 5 different ways to do it, but you can verify that they're correct more or less, right? So it's science in the small. So yeah, we cheat a little bit with the science, but I think there's ways to do it even outside the science where it's pure discussion, straight up opinion. I think it can be done. That's a good question.
I'm sorry, that's about all we have time for. Okay. Jeff, are you going to be around for a while? Maybe people can ask you one-on-one?
Just for a few minutes, sure.
Okay, great.
Right.
Thank you. Please give him a hand. Thanks, Jeff.